Hello, my name is Rob Good, and welcome to Shit. I Have to Teach in 20 Minutes, a podcast for history teachers and anyone who wants a quick dose of history. This will be our fourth episode, and thank you to our listeners in North America, South America, Asia, and Europe. We still need to connect with history teachers and history buffs in Africa and Oceania. So, if you have friends in Ghana, Kenya, Indonesia, New Zealand, Australia, or any other place in those regions, please share a link with them. In each episode, my colleague Eric Hahn and I interview a historian about their scholarship, asking them to identify the most important concepts they think teachers should share with their students about the topic for the day. We also include a free lesson plan that's absolutely free to you that can be downloaded from the episode notes linked to this podcast. So, Eric, what is our topic du jour?
French. So topic du jour, Rob, French?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Côte d'Ivoire. We also want Côte d'Ivoire to join. Yeah. So.
Right. Our raison d'etre, in this fait accompli, our topic of the day is to explore how to teach world history. It is a huge and complex course to teach. Many teachers have not received any training or education in how to teach the breadth of world history as it's taught today, and making decisions about curriculum and lessons can cause angst for some teachers. Often teaching world history, as it is with teaching any history, comes down to decisions about our approach to lesson development, where to find resources.
Wonderful. Well, so who is our guest today?
Today's guest has one of the more recognizable names in the field of world history education. He is Dr. Craig Miller from the Pennsylvania College of Technology, a Penn State affiliate. And while Craig specializes in constitutional, colonial, and indigenous history, he currently serves as an inimitable leader as chief reader for the Advanced Placement Program in World History Modern, overseeing national exam development and scoring. No small task, as hundreds of teachers, professors, and others are educated to score hundreds of thousands of written students' responses as after they take the AP World History Modern exam. Leading that process takes an even keel and tremendous organizational moxie. And as a side note, this podcast is not associated with the College Board, but closing out this introduction, Dr. Miller contributes to higher education policy through leadership roles in faculty governance, civil service commissions, and prison education consortia. Craig, we're ecstatic to have you as a guest today.
Yes, thank you for joining us, Craig.
My pleasure.
The big question we ask is, what advice would you give educators, especially those new to the field, regarding how to approach teaching world history?
Well, thanks. And thank you both for, again, having me. The challenge for any world history teacher who's teaching world history is that none of us are really world historians. And I think that's true at both the academic level as it is in the K through 12 system, right? To be a true world historian means to speak and be able to read and do research in dozens of languages and dozens of time periods and dozens of regions. And unfortunately for us, most of us don't live long enough lifespans to make that accomplishment. So what I try to focus on, my students are not history majors. The vast majority of them are going to go on to careers in technology or engineering. So what I focus on with them is there are two kind of broad categories that I encourage people who are teaching world history, particularly for people who are non-majors, is to focus first on the ways in which history is going to intersect with their world. Right? In what ways do any of that content matter? Are they going to interact with, or just broadly, the ways in which history is going to interact with them in their everyday lives? And then two are the skill sets you can learn from studying history. There's obviously a lot of critical thinking that goes on in history, a lot of looking through and seeing things from different perspectives, particularly when it comes to primary source analyses. But connecting back to the first point, right? Like when I teach, for example, the Qing dynasty, the Qing are the first real Chinese dynasty outside the Yuan to conquer Mongolia, to expand that far out of the reaches of what was traditional China. One of the things that the Qing leaders started to do after those conquests was instructed their literati and historians to start altering the records of previous empires, right? Because the previous empires, Ming, Song, Tang, all focused on the fact that there was a distinction between civilization and barbarism, and the wall was part of it, right? But reading, writing, agriculture, sedentism, these are all the hallmarks of civilization. And the way in which the Qing emperors to construct their narrative of power, right, started to rewrite those previous histories and previous sources to make it look like, no, the real issue is that we didn't spread civilization to all these people. And so this has been a 1,000-year-long civilization project of altering the past to suit their own present. And that's one of the things I talk about a lot with my students, that almost anytime they're hearing any politician or pundit reference history, they're doing so for a specific purpose. And that specific purpose is going to obfuscate some of the different ways in which you can look at the past. And so that's when I turn to the skills and say, let's start looking at the different ways we can interpret these public statements about history in conjunction with looking at primary sources, in conjunction with looking at secondary sources. So what I try to tell people is not to get too hung up on trying to know everything when you're teaching, right? You can't know everything. It's not possible to know everything. But if you have these niches where you can take those deeper dives, you can do so periodically to connect them back to those broader themes. And so that's kind of always where I like to start on the first week or so of a world history class, whether at the college level, we have to teach it in two halves typically. But the conversation is always just about the public uses of history, right? What does history mean? And when it's being utilized in a public square for particular purposes, we talk about different approaches to the study of history, feminist history, Marxist history, right? So they have the most wide ranging ideas about the ways in which the discipline can be approached. And then I always try to make connections to the present, right? Because again, we all have you guys all have curriculums at the K through 12 level you have to stick to, you have lesson planning you have to stick to. But at the same time, like the more you can make the material relevant to the students, the more interested they're going to be in it.
So that's it's a great pause here. I love the idea of how does the history that you're studying intersect with your world. That's a great comment. So what do you have any resources or websites or any primary documents in particular that your students enjoy to make that happen, Craig?
My students really enjoy reading anything about ancient laws or laws from different societies. So obviously the easiest one is Hammurabi, right? And the first written law codes, but then also having them look at, I spend a lot of time on East Asia and East Asian law. So having them look through the differences between legalist approaches versus Confucian approaches and the ways in which then states kind of subsume some of those narratives, like the way in which the Han Dynasty basically absorbs Confucianism into sort of this like state form of Confucianism, right? Kind of picking and choosing what worked for them and what didn't work for them. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I do a lot too with creation stories. So my students read a lot of indigenous creation stories from cultures all over the world, and then I have them kind of pair those with some of the major monotheistic religions. So they'll read the Iroquois creation story alongside the creation story of Genesis, right? To see what they can tease out from those creation stories about the societies that created the stories themselves. And so I have a lot of fun with those too, because the creation stories are just great ways to kind of take a dive into a different culture. And then it's also fun to have debates about a little bit of historical practice, right? How do you interrogate an oral tradition versus how you interrogate a more traditional written primary source?
That's, and I would think that in world history, that sort of comparative approach across different cultures is really important. I know that one of the challenges that a lot of teachers that I talk to when they're teaching world history, and especially when they're new to it, they're like, what am I supposed to choose to teach? Do you have any suggestions or advice for teachers around pacing and selection? I loved what you said about the sort of these broad themes that run current or run throughout, as well as historical thinking skills, but in just picking both location and chronology and those deeper dives, those niches that you sort of talked about. What is a good way for them to proceed with that?
I It's going to vary from person to person based on where your interest lies. So like if you're a person who's really, in your own personal life or in your graduate school work or in your undergraduate, focus more on, say, Southeast Asia, right? Southeast Asia, India in particular is not something I've spent a lot of time studying. And so instead I let the scholars who have done that deeper dive speak for me. So I put together a lot of unit packets for each unit that have these, demographic information, technology information, new technologies created, geographic information. And then I give them at least 3 or 4 primary sources, no more than 2 sentences, 2 to 3, or excuse me, 2 paragraphs a piece. And then I give them like 3 secondary sources to read. Same thing, a couple paragraphs a piece. And then really, I feel like the best way you can serve your students is by not pretending to be something you're not. right? And so when I don't know a lot about a subject area, I will tell them up front, like, the Roman Empire is not something I've spent a whole lot of my life taking a deep dive into. But luckily for you, there are thousands of nerdy historians who have, and I'm going to try to connect you with it. So really, I say, like, take those opportunities to take those deep dives when you feel more comfortable, because the more comfortable you feel in that discussion, when you're projecting that level of confidence, the more comfortable they're going to feel having that discussion with you. I've been
So
eaten alive by students.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Craig. Go ahead.
I've been eaten alive by students before when I tried to dig deep dives on something.
That was my whole career. I was just a carcass at the end.
Nothing but bones. It's such a great point, because I think most, if not all, new teachers to world history are getting the feeling. You started off by saying nobody is an expert. Very true. So what do you have any kind of suggestions or go to as far as pedagogy? Like what can a teacher do? How can they approach a particular topic when they don't have the background? You let the experts, give you the research, but then what do you do with that? Is it just here are a few primary document students, or is there a particular model that you like or enjoy?
I think you have to follow your own method consistently throughout class, no matter what you're doing, right? So if your method is that you like to do a lot of project-based learning, then stick with that project-based learning, and you can take those deeper dives on, preparation for a project beforehand, and then give them more of the reins to take it when you have less of that kind of deep dive knowledge. And I think too, like, it's important to remember that not to underestimate the students. I think sometimes we get in the trope of, like, I have to tell them everything or they're never going to know it. And I think your students will surprise you when you give them the opportunities to. And so I think laying that foundation of, like, having a specific critical approach. So, like, the first day of class, we just dissect what the word history actually means, where it comes from, how it's applied, what it entails, and then talking about different ways. And we literally make lists of different ways in which historians approach their craft. And then we decide, what kind of categories of analysis are we going to look at? Are we going to look at economics and trade? Are we going to look at gender relations? Are we going to look at religion? And I picked those different categories. And then again, you can break them up into groups and say, okay, so we just finished, I gave you a very brief lecture on the history of the Ottoman Empire. I'm going to give you guys some resources that are looking at Ottoman economics, Ottoman gender relations, Ottoman religious policies, kind of let them have at those things. But I would say the most important thing, whatever your pedagogical approach is to establish it early on in the semester and then stick with it. Right, because there's so much variety of material in world history that's one place where you can provide that level of consistency and an anchor, if you will, right, that they don't feel like they're just floating off into space. My students look at my syllabus and their jaw drops. They're like, how the hell are we covering this much material in 15 weeks? And I was like, and I'm usually like, we're not going to cover this. This is all aspirational, right? But the point being that I'm not trying to get you to be an expert on all these things. We're utilizing these different places and these different peoples to try to understand how history is used in the present and to develop skill sets that'll help us present.
I really appreciate how you have the faith you have in teachers for pursuing their interests in what they're best at, and faith in students to rise to those expectations. And I think we oftentimes get caught up in the standards say we have to do this, we have to cover this. And so, you cover a bunch of stuff. Nobody gets to see any of it. I love the aspirational syllabus. Is there any advice you would give to teachers in world history about chilling out a little bit about some of those standards and those fears of not meeting those expectations?
Yeah, remember that what we're doing is preparing these students to engage in a world that's already engaging them, and they're not prepared for it. Right. And so that the ultimate goal, I think, for all of us when we got into this was not to meet whatever the state standards were, not to have certain, percentiles of scores. We got into this because we fell in love with history and we saw the ways in which history really plays a role in almost every single facet of our lives. And let yourself relax a little bit about making sure you're covering everything. Like, it took me several years into teaching where I was like, you know what? It's not a physics class. If I don't get to the last formula, they're not screwed by the time they go on to the next class, right? So I think when you can get to that point where you're comfortable saying that the discussion and the critical thinking and the back and forth and the engagement is what matters more than the rote memorization of any of the material, I think it's easier to take that step back and not pressure yourself as much.
So, that's very interesting. I guess teachers also would have to make a choice as to what to teach. If you're teaching the Ottomans and you want students to learn about the Janissaries, do you omit teaching about the Young Turks, or do you have to do both in a short period of time? Is it okay to let something go?
Yeah.
What's your mentality with that?
My mentality is it's a great question, Eric, because I wrestled with this a lot, and I finally got to the point where I used my learning management system to try to help alleviate the deep internal pain I feel of not being able to cover everything that I want to. So I will put resources up there. And so for every unit I have, there's a link for recommended resources, right? So if they want to take those deeper dives on things, they have the opportunity to. I'll oftentimes give them extra credit. I'll have like a little, Q&A sheet for each of those documents if they want to go through it. But other times, sometimes they just want to geek out on it too. But I feel as long as I'm providing them extra resources, directing them to those resources, and then giving them an incentive to take that deep dive if they want to, I'm okay about it.
Yeah, good spot to close here. That's very calming, I think, for any teachers who might have big concerns about what they're doing. Craig, thank you so much for joining us today. And that was great expertise, sage advice in a very short period of time. Rob?
Yeah, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Remember, you can download your free lessons from the link provided in the episode notes, and we will have links to some of the other things that Craig talked about. And please stay tuned for a description of those lessons in just a sec.
A sec. All right. That's it, right?
Oh no, the clock is ticking, 20 minutes, time is spinning, pulling facts from thin air, hope they think I came prepared.
Those were reassuring comments by Craig Miller. There's an old joke among world history teachers that if you ask 10 different teachers about how to teach the course, you'll get 11 different responses. That nobody can really know or teach all of world history or how to do it. New teachers, while you may not be relaxed about the daunting course you need to teach, it is evident that you will find comfort in some topics, yet rely upon the experts in other time periods, people, or events in history. Heck, that's the point of this podcast, to share ideas and lean on one another, as I'm about to do, you'll hear. I was struck by Craig's reference to the Qing dynasty having been the first to conquer Mongolia. So I tried to find some primary documents about how the Qing would write their place in history to tame the so-called barbarians in that Qing point of view. I spent several hours down the rabbit hole trying to find a primary document that I thought would be appropriate for a secondary classroom, but only found some very academic, unedited sources. Most prominent was the Qing Dai Shilu, veritable records of successive reigns of the Qing dynasty. Too involved for most classrooms. We'll post a link for those primary sources, but teachers usually don't have the kind of time in their classrooms to develop a lesson around those documents. So I leaned on two secondary sources. The first is an official source from the Mongolian embassy in the United States. Note how brief the commentary is about Qing rule. The second source is from Germany. It's called China Knowledge, all one word, an excellent summary of the Mongolian uprising in the early 20th century. Students will ponder some questions about rulership and the longevity of the Qing takeover of Mongolia and those official perspectives. So here's my plea. If anyone, teachers, professors, history buffs, anybody listening to this podcast has an idea about a clear, concise, primary document regarding the Qing takeover or failures of Mongolian rule, please share it with us. We'll be interested in hearing from you. Rob, what's your takeaway from the interview with Dr. Miller?
I was also really moved by Craig's comments about historical humility, and I appreciate how you just, kind of shared that with your own struggle developing a lesson for the Qing dynasty. I know, he's laughing because I am appreciating him. It's a red letter day for everybody.
It is a red letter day. It's a,
everybody, take
mark
the day
this
off.
It's right now. Whatever you're doing, go to sleep. Whatever time you're listening to this podcast, do something else. Go ahead, Rob. Sorry to interrupt.
But no. I mean, I think it's really important to recognize the challenges, and particularly in world history. I am not a world history teacher, so I'm a neophyte when it comes to all of it. Anyway, being a neophyte, what I did was I developed a lesson that was inspired by his comments about creation stories. In this lesson, students use a Venn diagram to compare and contrast 3 creation stories from North America, Africa, and China. And then they hypothesize why those stories might be different or similar. The last question asks them what they would need to learn to be able to confidently respond to the compare and contrast questions. Opening the year with this lesson would hopefully help students realize they don't need to know everything, and their teacher will not know everything. But together we can understand more as we search for more evidence.
Well, that genuinely is a great lesson, Rob. Everybody likes good origin stories, and the students seem to latch onto them. It's the beginning of the school year. Everybody's excited. So thank you for listening. And remember, you can download your free lesson from the link provided in the episode notes. And please be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts and on Instagram and YouTube. And feel free to share a lesson of your own with us. Rob will tell you how.
You can reach us, as always, for any feedback, questions, or suggestions you have about the conversations and lessons at historyin20@gmail.com. History in 20 is all spelled out. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you for joining us today. Be sure to rate us and share the link with others. Bye.
Bye. Bye.